Now we're going to do some critical thinking of what it was like to be in the Incan time. If we recreate something, or try to, maybe we'll see something we don't see in our minds. Here we have two rocks unshaped on a base stone, let's say. And here's a shaped big rock. Now, you're wearing sandals and a shawl or whatever the hell it is. You walked over to the quarry, which is, well, could be 30 miles away. But you walked there, okay, because you didn't really have a horse or a Honda moped or nothing. Now, we look at this rock here. This gigantic rock. Let's say it's 20 feet long, all right? And we're back there in the day. Now, the quarry master wants you to cut it so much because they need a stone, but they want it cut and shaped so they don't have to drag it all the weight. So what do? You grab your tape measure here. You grab your tape measure. No, they didn't have one. Okay. You grab your metal chisel to work on it. Nope, they didn't have one. Do you grab your favorite hammer? Okay? No, didn't have anything like this. And if one thing you will notice about those two hammer fragments that they have in the museum, those look like they were real heavy bitches. You got to pick those up and swing those. The solid stone. I don't know what they're made of, but they're solid stone. Now, let me tell you a story about critical thinking. We have a maximum security prison here. It's been here forever, and the people up there are extremely creative. I don't know if they can be let out in society, but they're very extremely creative. And let me tell you a story. Now, say it was Alcatraz, and this is a true story. One day, the guards came into this guy's cell, and all the bars were cut out. Real clean, 4 or 5 of them, enough to make a 2 or 3 foot hole, and he escaped. There were no tools or anything in the cell, and they couldn't figure out how he did it. Okay, this is where critical thinking comes in. This is where if a mind concentrates on one thing long enough, they can find a solution. And that's just what the Incans did, because this is all they had. If you had a 30-ton rock like this, they'd say, cut it. Well, how would you do it? Well, in our minds were going like, well, you'd haul in a construction crew and this and that. This is where the rubber meets the road. Now back to our story. Okay. This was the bar, the thickness that was cut through. Okay? Solid steel. There were 6, 7, or 8 of them cut through, and the guy escaped. The guards could not figure out anything. Finally, they captured the guy. They said, how in the hell do you do this? He used 3 things to cut through that bar. Cut through those bars. This was the first thing. String, which you could get. Okay. Glue, which you could get. And sand. And that's dirt. He put the glue on the string. He glued the sand to the string. And he spent hours and hours cutting. And he cut a little bit, and he'd get a little bit of clay. And he'd put it in there, and rub it in there, and it looked like it was fine. He did all the bars that way. But you never thought about it if you hadn't really put your mind to it. You see? Now we have to think about how the Incas fitted the rock, but how did they shape them to be level? Did they use hammer and picks? Did they break out their level? No, they didn't have a level. Did they break out their ruler? No, didn't have a ruler. But they did the same procedure over and over and over again. Now, what I think they did, and it's theoretical, but it makes sense. If they could cut the rock, say the sentinels, the teeth in the middle of that sexy woman were all shaped, okay? Somebody did that. They shaped the rock. Well, if they shaped the rock in the front, why can't they shape the rock in a straight line, cutting it? And somebody cut those lines so that the next rock could sit on top of it. Now suppose, just bear with me here. I mean, because remember, this is all they had. They had rope, they had manpower, they had logs, and who knows what else. But suppose they were able to take their rope and glue some abrasive to it. Let's just say, okay, they go back and forth, back and forth. When the abrasive starts to wear out, they just pull the rope farther on and keep going. But this is the point I'm trying to make. They had access to wood. Now that nice little tour guide thing that showed you how to split rock, that was probably put there in 1990. I don't think there's any other example of it. But think about this. If they could cut rock with stone, if this prisoner could cut through a 3-inch steel bar, okay, or 2-inch, and I want to tell you one thing, I don't know his name, but after he cut through that, they instituted a policy where the outer steel bar is, the inner steel bar, it's hollow inside. And they have a stainless steel bar that runs on, well, it circles. So that no one can cut through them. Stainless steel and hardened. Now let's check this out. Okay, we have a 20-foot rock. Now, maybe this is all bullshit. You know, I'm going through the motions because I'm going slow because I'm sure that someone's going to steal this idea. They may not. But I'm not going to put up with some Incanologist or anthropology professor breaking out some book and going on CNN saying he found all this out. Because I found it all out. Okay. Suppose they could cut rock with a rope. You got 100 guys on one side, 100 guys on the other. Now this is the point. Suppose they cut 6 inches just down through here. Just 6 inches, that's all. Then they took their wooden wedges and jammed them in there. You see, in order to break the rock, they would have to have holes in order to put the wooden wedges. No one has ever said how that's happened. And then if you look at the lonely stones or tired stones, which were there at the invasion, they're all square cut. Right? Something cut those. They weren't pecked on with a hammer and a chisel. Even though they did have a hammer and a chisel. Now back to a sexy woman. I can prove my point. Behind the first row. Okay, here's the flat. Everyone thinks they lifted the stones higher and higher and higher. They didn't. Okay. This was flat behind here. As soon as they had the first row, they filled in dirt and rubble all the way up to here, and then they dragged the next stone up to right there, and they braced it with a couple of timbers. The way to prove that is if the Peruvian government were, now I don't know how good this is, take ground sensing radar and go up on that first level above the teeth, and if they can image what's beneath it, if they find any evidence down in here or anywhere beneath that dirt that there's any kind of archaeological Incan man-made tools, which I bet you they'll find a whole shitload of them, then my theory is correct. But also, you have to remember that to get the stones to fit, and this is I've advanced my theory a little bit. Say we have the two stones right here, okay, and say remember, they couldn't do it on little stones because the little stones would move out. They had to have a certain weight. Once they set the stones in there, they didn't go anywhere. Now I thought they would put them real close together and do it. What if they didn't? What if they had them a little bit apart, which they could do? They could move this a little bit apart, and they could take their bigger rope saw. Let's say it has abrasive on it. I don't know. You know, I don't know if suppose this is granite and this is granite. If you put granite dust on here, would it cut it? I don't know. But look very carefully. Okay, what they could do, instead of cutting all the way through the rock like this, they could slowly take off equal amounts of both sides. Okay, and this one's already set in. So then they move this one a little bit closer, and they do it again. But it wouldn't be exactly right butted up next to it. Okay. Now the only problem I have with that is that in the base here, where they have the logs, they're up here. They're not down here, which is amazing. But if this theory is correct, then they must have somehow butted up against this new stone and had it up a little bit, like right there. Okay? Now, suppose they did have that. Suppose we have two stones right here, one on top of the other. And this is a cutout diagram. But you have your rope saw. Now it's just theory, I don't know. But you have your poles holding it up. Okay, and what happens is they have a lip on their little inset, which they may or may not, I don't know. But if you had a rope, say you had a rope like this, and if you talk about my theory of 50% on the top, 50% on the bottom, if you had a rope that would barely go through there, and you started to saw through there, the rope would go like this. Okay? The rope would dig this part out, and it would dig a little bit on the front out. It would dig a trowel or a, I don't know. It would dig a little tiny bit out of here. And as the rock was set, a little bit of this would disappear, a little bit of that would disappear. And it would set in here, but this bottom rock, which this rock is set on, will show signs of indents in the front. But I'm thinking that the rope would not work unless the pressure was taken off with these logs. Then what they could do, you see, they could pound these logs out, and then the stone would fall down a little bit, and they could move it closer with a rope here and a rope here. All right, and then what they could do is put the logs back in and maybe lift the stone, maybe not. Maybe you wouldn't need to lift the stone, as long as when you're cutting, you don't have the weight of the stone pressing on the rope saw. What I'm saying is that's all I had. Okay, there was no space aliens, no nothing. So if we look at this in a critical mind, that could be the way they did it. And they did every one of them the same way. Either lousy or better. Okay, thank you.